It's been 2 weeks since I attempted to run my first 100-mile race and DNF'd, and it is time to just get into all of y'all's questions and share a little bit more what I learned, what it was like out there, and just answer all of y'all's questions post-race. And if you're new here, hello, my name is Molly. I am sure if you're watching this video, you have watched my Rocky Raccoon 100-miler DNF vlog, but if you haven't, I will link it here so you can go back and watch. But I am so happy you are here. I'm so excited to share more about this race. I feel like I really haven't talked too much in depth about all of it. Obviously, there was the curated video and the shots of me out there really struggling, but I'm excited just to give a closer look into what it was like to experience the race out there if you are running Rocky Raccoon in the coming years, and hopefully this video will also be helpful for you. And yeah, maybe just you're interested in ultras, you're going for your first 100 miler, you've also DNF'd, whatever it is. I'm just so happy you're here and so excited to share more. I share a lot of running, reading, Disney, life in my 30s style vlogs, and so if that is something you're interested in, I hope you will subscribe and stick around. But let's get into all these questions. So I asked on both YouTube and Instagram if you had any questions for me to answer about the Rocky Raccoon, and I got a handful. I also already did a Q&A on Instagram answering a lot of questions, so I'll try not to double dip too much, but I know not everyone here is over on Instagram, but if you're interested in that, I have it saved as a highlight on my profile on Instagram. But yeah, I'm trying to kind of like categorize all the different questions, and so I think the categories, I have my computer right here with all of the questions written out. I think the categories will first be just overall the race, Rocky Raccoon. Then it kind of questions more about ultras and trail running, a couple questions on injuries, a couple questions on like training and fuel. But yeah, so I'll kind of be all over the place, but hopefully it'll be a little organized. I want to start with the Rocky Raccoon specific questions, and also just want to give a little more background in case you didn't follow a lot of my training and just kind of happened upon this video. So I started training for my first 100-mile race with a coach in July of 2024. Rocky Raccoon was the first weekend in February 2025. So I was training for a very long time. I will say a lot of that time with my coach was me more so coming off of an injury and making sure I was scaling in a really healthy way. I wasn't really like technically training since July, but I was working with a coach to train specifically for this race. I've done 150K, 150 miler, and this was my first 100-mile race. My training went really great. I felt really strong, had such a good training block, like probably one of the best training blocks that I've had, was injury-free right up until the very end. After my peak week of training, noticed my Achilles started hurting then with about 2 weeks to go until the race. I got the flu and it took a week off of running, and then that last week leading into the race, I only ran once just because I was worried about my Achilles. My Achilles hurt on that run, but I really was just hoping it was some kind of weird, like not a legitimate injury, which of course it is. So did everything I could to try and tend to it and heal it leading into the race. And if you watch the video, then you know my Achilles started hurting at mile 4, and ultimately that is what led me to drop at mile 55. So that's a little bit of background. And again, you can watch like the whole video. You can watch a lot of my training. I have all of that here on my profile. Okay, so the first question is, how does the crewing work? And what I really like about Rocky Raccoon is that I think it's a pretty great course for spectating and for your crew, just because it's really easy to get around. It's a loop style course, so it's a 20-mile loop, and there are aid stations about every 5 miles. So in terms of your crew, they could meet you at the aid station. They could meet you kind of somewhere along the course if they're able to get to it. But most of the crews are set up at the start and finish line. There's just like a big strip of tents. That's where we set up. That's where my family kind of set up a home base for me. And every time I would get back around, which I guess was only twice, I would restock all of my fuel, just like make sure I had everything that I needed for the next loop. So yeah, that's kind of how the crewing worked. It'll be different for every ultra, but specifically for Rocky Raccoon, there's a huge area right at the start. Really fun, really lively, a lot of music. People bring like grills, coffee machines, like everyone's just out there for a good time, and they're set up there. And yeah, I kind of had all of my main stuff there at like that home base, which you've heard me talk about if you watched my other videos. And then pacers could start with you starting at mile 50, and they could just hop in officially at any aid station. They had to hop in at an aid station, but you could use them, you could switch pacers every aid station if need be. Which leads me into my next question. People asked if I was planning on having pacers. Did I use pacers? What was my pacer strategy? So my family was out there with me. The entire plan, like leading up to it, was to start having my family pacing me at mile 60, because that would have been me completing my third loop, and I just like felt like that would work out with the amount of mileage that everyone in my family wanted to run. Everyone kind of just wanted to do 5-mile chunks with me, which is great. But at mile 40, I talked with my family out there, and they were like, okay, let's just start at 50 instead of 60. So they kind of devised a new plan to have my family with me starting at 50, because I really needed it. So my mom started pacing with me at 50. We walked the entire time. It was actually great. We just like talked to each other. And yeah, then I ended up dropping at the next aid station. That was 55. I decided at mile 52 that I was going to call it. And yeah, that is kind of the pacing situation. Like I said, you can have pacers with you starting at mile 50, and you can only have one pacer at a time, but people could really run kind of whatever distance you wanted. I definitely recommend having pacers out there. I've got a couple questions about what I would do differently, but I will definitely plan on having pacers starting with me at mile 50 next year. I just really underestimated how much I would be struggling. So yeah, I would definitely have people starting at 50, and definitely recommend using pacers and just people that you'll be really excited about seeing out there. That just really helps me so much. Next question was, what did I think about the entire time? Which I think is so funny, because whenever I post on Instagram about like doing long runs without music, people are like, wait, how do you not get so bored? Like, what on earth are you thinking about? And I mean, specifically during the race, I really was just like going through my head, thinking through like the injury and all these different scenarios. So I feel like my brain was pretty occupied with the injury, for better or worse. But truthfully, when I'm not running with music and I'm out on the trails, I really don't think about anything. I feel like it just completely clears my mind, which is really rare. I have just like a lot going on, and so like I feel like I'm usually honestly pretty stressed on like a day-to-day basis. I am working on it, but usually there's just like to-do lists and like things I'm like thinking about, ideas, like something I remember that I have to do is usually like flooding my mind. And so I actually feel like it's really cool that during running all that seems to kind of just like disappear and is not a worry, and it's just like really calming for me. I feel like I said, during the ultra specifically, I was definitely thinking about the injury a lot, but for a lot of time, I just wasn't thinking about anything. And I really welcome that time to not think about anything. I really welcome like that boredom that can kind of come with running, because again, like I don't have that time anywhere outside of running. So I think that's really cool. I also will say, I think it takes time to like build up to like not being bothered by that boredom. It's not like all of a sudden I just started running for 3 hours without music to stimulate me. Like I definitely built up that tolerance, and now it's something I really enjoy. But also I obviously really enjoy running to music too, running with friends, talking, whatever. But yeah, highly recommend trying to train yourself to start to run without needing any type of stimulation, because I think you just get so much mentally stronger if you do that. Next question was, what time of day did I officially drop? Gosh, way too late for the distance that I went. I was really struggling. So woke up at 3 a.m. The race started at 6 a.m. Kept on my pace for the first loop, and then it just like all it all went out the window. So mile 50, I don't even know what time we started. I think we probably started around 9, and it took 2.5 hours to go 5 miles. So we were pretty close to midnight when I dropped. It was a long day out there. It was also a long day for like my parents. Like they do not stay up that late. Like they usually go to bed by the time my mom was starting with me. So yeah, I just really appreciate everyone being out there like so much. But yeah, it was a long day. Next question, what was the hardest part? Oh God, oh my gosh, all of it. I don't even know if I can pinpoint like the hardest part. I think I was very in my head, and I know that like I made it as far as I could have without doing anything worse to my Achilles. I think I've said this, maybe I haven't, but when we got back to the hotel, my Achilles was really swollen. It was really bruised, and it just like really freaked me out, because I was like, oh my gosh, if I kept going, like I could have actually torn it, or not shattered it. What word am I thinking of? Ruptured it. Like my Achilles could have ruptured. Like it was so bruised. It was like, I'd never seen anything like that before. So I think all that to say, I think I was just like very in my head about the injury, which again, I called it at the right time, but it was just really hard for me to get into a positive headspace out there. And I can tell in the video, like I'm trying so hard to still be positive and keep my spirits up and like stay optimistic, but miles 20 to 30 honestly was the worst part of the ultra because I was so in my head and I was like, I've only done one lap and I have 80 miles to go and my Achilles hurts so badly. Then all these other things started to hurt and I was just like going down this spiral of like, oh my gosh, like I still have such a long time out there and it was really hard to like get out of that mindset, which every time I like saw a family, when my friends surprised me, all that, it like pulled me out of it. And I was like, you know what, I am really lucky to be out there. But it's just interesting like watching back my shots that I got during it because I know myself and I can see that I'm like really in pain, but can also see that I'm like trying so hard to like still keep a positive attitude, which I think is really important out there. So honestly, I think the hardest part was just like my mindset and getting out of the like, oh my gosh, I'm in so much pain, but I'm going to try and keep going. So yeah. Also, y'all, this room, it's like the community area in our apartment and it is so cold. I don't know why when it gets cold outside, this room cannot like regulate its temperature. It is like 55 degrees in here. So if you see me wiping my nose a lot, it's because I'm actually so cold. Next questions were specifically about the style of the race. It was a loop format, like I said, at 20 miles, 5 laps. So a lot of people asked how I liked the loop format. Did I like it more than like a point to point? So I don't know. I'm really undecided on how I feel. I think I liked it because it was easy for crew and pacers to kind of go out and see you. And that's just really important to me. Like, I don't want the people who are there for me to have a hard time like trying to see me, if that makes sense. I probably focus on that a little too much, but I'm like, I want it to be a good experience for them as well. So I liked it because you also can kind of prep for what's coming, but I also don't like it because you know what's coming. And so especially on this course, which I felt was pretty hilly in comparison to what I had heard ahead of time, it's like I kind of knew like, oh, here we go. Like we're going on a portion of a ton of different hills. So that was kind of hard, but overall, I actually think I enjoyed the loop format more than I thought I would. I thought I would go a little bit crazy, but I think especially with it being 20 miles, it's not like you necessarily remember the entire course. Like the third lap, I was like, I mean, it was also dark, but I was like, I do not remember some of this. Like what is going on out here? So yeah, I liked it more than I think. I don't think I would want to do a 10-mile loop course. I felt like 20 was the perfect distance for the loop. Next question was a little bit more about my gear, about my shoes, my socks, how my feet held up. Did I have any blisters? I actually felt so happy with my feet situation. I did have one huge blister, the biggest blister I've ever had when we got back to the hotel, but I never felt it during it. Didn't have any blisters from like toes rubbing or anything because I ended up wearing those toe socks from Injinji. I mentioned them a couple times in my training vlogs because they just like felt, they're different material than the socks that I usually wear. So I ended up wearing those, and some of y'all actually suggested that I put my features socks over the Injinji toe socks just because the material of the Injinji, I was like, I don't know if I like this. And that ended up being so perfect. So if you were one of the people who suggested that, thank you so much. It was also cold out there, and so I feel like the double socks really helped. But yeah, I felt like that held up perfectly. And then last minute, I don't recommend doing this, but I had trained in my New Balance, what can I remember the name? Like the New Balance 1040s, and it was raining leading up to the race, and so the course was a little bit muddier, and with the New Balance being road shoes, they really don't have like anything for good traction. So last minute, I decided to run in my Hoka Speed Goats, which I have done when I do trail running. I primarily run in those. I have some Merrells that I really like and some Solomons, but for other races that I've done, I have had my Speed Goats, and so I ended up wearing those day of, and they were perfect. I'm so glad I decided to make that switch and run in them again. Like I didn't train in them specifically, but I have run in them before. My shoes were broken in, so I don't necessarily recommend doing that, but I just knew the New Balance, I would slip so much without any traction on those shoes. So yeah, definitely recommend the toe socks to prevent blisters, and the double layering also really worked for me. So if you have like a colder race, I think that would work really well. Last few questions specifically about the race, but question is, what would I do differently if I'm to do it again? I actually have a lot of things. I journaled a lot in my planner / journal after the race, and I literally like have 10 things that I would do differently. So let's see what they are. The first one was I needed more hills. I did hill work during this training block, but I never did it on like a long hill. I would just do like double time. Like if it was like run up a hill for a minute, but my hill only took me 30 seconds, I would just like do it twice. And honestly, I just am realizing now that that's not the same. Like going up and then down and then back up to get the minute, it's different than the continuous 1 mile hill. And the hills out there were just so big. Like I really wasn't expecting that. And obviously I had studied the course map. I looked at the elevation and I just felt like, and I talked to other people too who said they kind of like felt the same, but the course just was very shockingly very hilly. And I kind of feel like dumb saying that because it's like, well, shouldn't I have known that going into it? But yeah, it really caught me off guard when I finished at 55. There'd already been 8,000 feet of elevation gain. And I just like honestly was not prepared for that. So would definitely do more work on hills. I'll try to keep these next ones pretty short, but I would also do way more trail runs. I had also just heard that the course wasn't super technical, and I just really wished when I was out there that I had been doing more trail running. Like Austin has amazing trails. I've said this before. I don't really feel safe going on them alone as a female. I think there are some, and I've seen in past, just some really questionable characters out there, and there's just some parts where you like are deep out there and you're like, I haven't seen anyone in a long time, and like that's not a fun feeling. So I need to figure out whether it's getting back to running with a group, getting Dom to go with me, but to do it again, I would definitely want to be doing majority of my long runs out on the trails here. Also definitely more strength training, but specifically more like accessory work and the smaller muscles that just aren't typically targeted. I just like felt a lot of those out there. I was like, what is this muscle? So I definitely want to be better about accessory work, and I've said I really want to spend this spring doing strength training, so I think that'll help a ton. I'd bring more variety for fuel. My fuel worked really great for me, didn't have any stomach issues, and I'll get into fuel a little bit, but I was getting very tired of my fuel. The bars were just like not like I was like, I feel like I'm eating bird food. Like I do not want to keep eating this, and I did keep eating it, but yeah, I would definitely practice, I think, with more fuel, different like variety of fuel as well. I was also for some reason just like so fixated on time, and I don't know why, because I'm really not like a time person, and that's like one of the coolest things about ultras is no one really cares about their time, but for some reason I just like fixated on this 24-hour finish. And so the first lap, which like was the most fun because it was when I was in the least amount of pain, I was just so focused on the time and making sure I was like keeping to it. And I just don't know why I did that. So I would care a lot less about time. No idea where the 24-hour goal came from. I think just because it like sounds good to finish in 24 hours, but it's like I talked to so many people on that Monday morning when we left the hotel who they were near like the tail end of the cutoff time, which was 32 hours. And I was just like, what was I doing? Like it's perfectly fine to finish in that amount of time. So I don't know. I would just like stop caring about that so much. I would use pacers starting at mile 50, which I talked about. I would use caffeine pills maybe a little bit earlier. I used it right as right at 45, I think. Yeah, that sounds right. At 45, I used it and it helped a ton. Like I feel like it lifted my spirit. So I might try utilizing them more throughout. And I would also I had a short sleeve shirt and I should have changed into it after the first loop. That was just like so chaotic. I basically thought there was a restroom right where we had kind of set up the home base, because there was a restroom right there, but they were locked. So I had to go all the way back up to the front, which was about 0.4 miles away from where we were. Like it was a good distance, and I was still so focused on time. So I like ran to the bathroom, shouldn't have done that, ran back. Then I was like, oh my gosh, I have to pack up all my fuel, refill my water. There was so much going on, and I ended up not changing my shirt. And then I was so hot on the second lap. So I would definitely just like not bring more clothes because I had them, but I would just like actually change. I would also plan on listening to podcasts and audiobooks while I was out there. I was trying to not listen to anything until mile 50 or 60. I ended up listening to stuff starting at mile 20, but I think I just would have, next time my strategy would be to still do the first lap without anything, then maybe the next ones use like the audiobooks or the podcast just to entertain me and kind of switch between nothing, the books, and then start using the music later on. I just like wish I had stuff loaded up and ready to go because I was very unwell out there and I needed something, and it was fine because I had my music. But then of course by you know, mile 50, I was like, okay, well, I've heard this song. Like, I don't want to listen to it again. This last one, I really need to, I don't know. I just have so many conflicting thoughts. And I talked about this during training. Training can look so many different ways. And even with, you know, if you're not training for an ultra, but you know, people training for marathons, you might be confused because you know someone who's running 17 miles as their longest training run, but then you know someone who's running 24 miles, you know, someone who's running 26 miles, like same with half marathons. Like some people do 20-mile long runs training for a half marathon, while you also might know someone who only does an 8-mile long run. And so there's just so much variation and so many different ways to train. And I know that, but I will say I just felt like my mileage wasn't quite high enough for this race. I just felt like I was tired so much earlier than I expected out there. And obviously a lot of that is because of the Achilles, but also I just like, I don't know. It's hard because like I know the lower mileage is to help prevent the injury, but I still got injured. So I don't know. There's just a lot to figure out there and think through for this next time. And yeah, I don't know. So I don't know if one of my things I would do differently would be more mileage, because I still got injured on the lower mileage, but I also feel like I would want to do more mileage so I like really feel better about going in, since I got tired just so early. And maybe that's because I wasn't doing enough hills. Maybe it's because I was on the trails. Like maybe it wasn't enough strength. I don't know. There's so many different things, but yeah, that is just something that's been on my mind. But those are some of my lessons learned that I journaled about. And then the last one, it's so kind, just asking how I am doing. And I am doing great. Like I said, it's been 2 weeks since the race. Honestly, I feel like nutrition and just like the supplements that I started like being diligent about my nutrition and making sure I was taking all of my supplements pretty much immediately after the race. Like I had packed a lot of supplements and stuff for even just like the next day, because I remembered from the 50 miler that I had felt just like so exhausted for a very long time. Like my energy was so low, and I was like, I do not want to feel like that again. So just making sure like my iron was still high and like taking iron supplements and stuff like that. Yeah, energy wise, I feel really great. The race was Saturday. Obviously by Wednesday, I was not sore or anything at all. Am still dealing with the injuries that I had out there. So I am in PT for both my Achilles and my plantar fascia. It'll be probably probably got like 2 more months, hopefully. I don't know. I'm like, I should probably like tell myself 3 more months of PT before my injuries are fully recovered. But yeah, so I'm still dealing with like the side effects of the injuries out there and whatnot. But overall, I feel really good. I've got a half marathon soon, and then a half marathon again in the spring. But overall, I feel like I really have like the time and the space to kind of take some time off of running and be really diligent with PT and strength training. So overall, I am doing so well. So thank you for asking. Next kind of genre of questions is just about trail running and ultras. And someone asked how I got into it and mentioned that they are super intimidated by the trails and trail races. And I 100% get that. I think it is so scary, like moving into something different that we're not used to, especially something like ultras and like these longer distances. It can be really intimidating. But before I even answer how I got into it, I just want to reassure you that the ultra community is one of the most welcoming and inclusive communities that I've ever truly been a part of. Like everyone out there is so kind. I think it is so cool that you get out there and you just see so many different body types out there. There are a lot of people walking. Like it is really not an intense environment at all, even for it being a longer distance in the marathon. It really is just like a very chill, like very outdoorsy group. Everyone, obviously, like you're on the trails, everyone's just so excited to be outside. So I just want to encourage you, if you are interested in it, definitely go for it, because everyone is so kind. Like you're all like chatting out there, like you're encouraging each other. There's just so much camaraderie, because I think everyone knows just like how hard and intensive it is to train for something like that. And so when you're out there, everyone is just like, you got this, keep going, because everyone wants everyone to finish, because we just know how much we've poured into it. And so I just love the ultra and the trail running community. I think it's so special. So that is my little spiel on getting into it, because I feel like sometimes it's really intimidating to go into spaces where you don't know anyone or don't know that much about it. But if there's anything I can say about the ultra running community, it's that everyone is so inviting and warm and welcoming. And I even felt that in the first trail race that I did. My first trail race was a 50K. It was right outside of San Francisco, and I was so nervous because I was like, I don't know if I can do this. Like it's so much farther. It's my first trail race. And the reason that I got into it is actually because I saw other girls on social media getting into it, and like girls who just made it feel so approachable. They were relatable. Like they just made it seem like it was something I could really do, and they were sharing their journey of training for these races for the first time. And I just thought it was so cool. I never really knew about ultras. I never knew about trails. And yeah, I just thought it was so cool to see someone else like doing it and trying and not being scared to try. And so that's why I'm like so passionate about sharing my journey on social media, because I realize and understand like a lot of the reason that I wasn't scared to try in the first place was because I saw other people trying, and I just think that's really cool. So I got into it probably like 3 or 4 years ago was when we moved to, it was a little bit after we moved to Austin. So we'd probably been in Austin for about 1.5 years. So it was probably like 3.5 years ago where I started running on the trails and just like learning more about the world of ultra running and the longer distance races. Just got really excited. I had done a handful of marathons at that point, and you know, wasn't really interested in training for speed, but I was like, I feel like training to go longer and farther is really enticing and really cool. And I feel like that's a really cool new challenge that I didn't know was out there until I saw people on social media doing it. So that is a little bit about how I started. And I'm just so grateful that people share their journey online. I think, I don't know, there's just like so much about social media where people are like, that's cringe, or like, why are you making it your whole personality? But I think on the other hand, if you just like realize how much of an impact you can make on social media sharing your journey, it's really, really cool. And I don't know if I ever would have discovered it if it weren't for social media. So I'm just very grateful for like the running communities online as well. Someone asked my typical pacing for running long distances. It definitely depends. It depends whether I'm on the road. It depends whether I'm on trail. It depends on what season of life I'm in and what kind of speeds I can run at. I definitely used to be faster than I am now. I think there's just been a lot of like health things and just like overall stress that honestly has probably contributed to me not being as fast. I have no idea. I had thought that I would maybe want to train for speed and go for like a PR, but now I know that I want to go for 100 miles again. So who knows if I'll ever get back to the speed that I used to ever run, which isn't even like that fast. I've never broken a sub for a marathon. So yeah, my fastest time on a marathon, which literally feels like a lifetime ago, was like 4:06. And typically nowadays when I run on the roads, if I'm like trying and being aware of my pace, I'm probably somewhere in like the 10-minute range, but out on the trails, I'm closer to 12 to 13 minutes. Don't look at my time from Raccoon because it was like 20 minutes a mile. But yeah, as a whole, I definitely run more double-digit mile times. And yeah, that has also just made running more fun to me, to stop stressing about the time and just like go out there and have a good time. I asked how I recover post ultras, and I think the biggest two things that I've done, well, there's a couple, but two biggest would be fueling right, nutrition, eating enough. I think it can be tempting after a race. It's like you refuel really well, like your meal after, and then you just like try and be like, oh, well, I'm not running as much, I'm not gonna eat as much. No, like fueling is literally the key to having a good amount of energy. And so just eating really nutritious, filling, big meals has been huge for me. And again, such a difference between the recovery after my first 50 miler to this one, which essentially was like, it was only a couple miles more than 50. And so just like night and day difference between my recovery, getting really great sleep, making sure I'm sleeping enough, going to bed at a good time. I love going to bed early and waking up early, and so I'm still doing that. Like that's something I would do during training, and it's something I still really enjoy and just my body is used to. And then I'll say going on walks, I think also really helps with not being as sore. So the day after the ultra, I did not walk, and we just stayed in the hotel. But after that, I kind of started to consistently go on short walks, and I think that helps a lot too. Last question in this category was, do I feel burned out at this point or more determined to run another milestone after I recover? I actually don't feel burnt out, and I think that's because the training really wasn't anything that was too crazy. I think if I had been running like 100-mile weeks or something like that, I would probably feel very burnt out. I will say I am super excited for a season of less running and getting to lean more into strength training and just like being able to go on longer walks and everything like that in the morning. But overall, I'm definitely not burnt out, and I'm very excited to go for the Rocky Raccoon again in 2026. I obviously in the video, I was like, I am never doing this again. I don't even know what I said, but I was like, no, I'm not doing this again. And then the next morning I was like, yep, I want to do this again. Like, we'll be back. So I don't really have any other goals in between now, and that race, that will be my next big race unless something changes and I have the opportunity to run a different race, which really would only come up because I'm working with a brand or something, but don't have anything else on my calendar for a big race. So as I know I keep mentioning, but really my focus is just on the healing and the recovery for my injuries and leaning more into strength training. So then come summertime, I can kind of ramp back up my running and start training for Rocky Raccoon 2026. Next couple of questions are about the injury. So people just wanted to know like how I'm doing, what the injury was and all of that, which is so sweet. So like I mentioned, I dropped because of my Achilles and it was really bruised and swollen. I was so worried that I tore something in it just because I'd never had anything like discolored like that, but it seems like it was just a really bad inflammation on both the Achilles, so like Achilles tendinopathy, and then like on the inside as well, posterior tibial something. So yeah, if you're a PT or know all the muscles, you'll probably know what I'm saying. But basically it was injury on the Achilles and then also like the inside of my foot too, which was causing the discoloration, and then the plantar fasciitis. I dealt with that last spring, and then I like flared it back up in the summer when I was playing pickleball, and it never hurt when I ran, but it would hurt sometimes like later in the day after my long runs, and honestly it just like was something I kept ignoring. I was like, it doesn't hurt when I run, so I'm fine, it's fine. And of course that flared up back out there too, so now I'm really like, okay, we gotta get back down to pain level 0 for both of those, just because it's silly. It was silly of me to think I could run that race and like head into it with injuries that I had. That's another thing that I would take away. Don't go into those races with an injury. I think some people are okay pushing through the pain, but I just like get so worried about the long-term damage that I might be doing. So yeah, that is how I'm doing. That's how the injuries are. And then the other question regarding injuries are tips on keeping your days busy with an injury, which I really get. When I went through my first major injury just a couple years ago, it's so funny because I'm like, I tell people I'm not really injury prone, and I'm like, the past 2 years, it would definitely seem like I'm pretty injury prone, but a couple years ago, I had a grade 3 ankle sprain. I didn't sprain it on a run, I sprained it on a walk. It was very frustrating. I was out for a little over 3 months, and that was my first time really being out of running for a long time, and mentally, I was just not okay, but I'm thankful because I learned so much during that time and just realized how much I had been pushing other things on the back burner for running. And obviously, like, you know, at the time I was growing my account, like there were just a lot of really exciting things happening within running. And not that I'd put all my eggs in one basket, but in terms of like hobbies and things I love to do, I feel like I really put all my eggs in the running basket. So then when it was just suddenly stripped away from me, I was like, oh my God, like what? Like it was just a very hard time. But I would just say that this is your time to lean into the other things that you usually push to the side because of running. I know even if you were the most balanced, like great rhythm person, you still have to prioritize running above other things. So maybe you say no to a lot of hanging out with your friends because you've got an early long run like the next day or something like that. So maybe during this time you're like, okay, well maybe I can start doing more stuff with friends for a little bit longer, or just a little bit more on my calendar because I have more of a capacity. Maybe you can reach back for that hobby that has been collecting dust in the corner that you haven't been able to have the energy or the capacity for because you're tired from running. I think it's just, injuries are so frustrating and so hard mentally, but running will always be there for you. Like you will be back to running and you will be okay. And so I just encourage you, if you can, I know it's really hard and some days are harder than others, but if you can just look for the silver lining of like, hey, now I've got this time to really get back into X, Y, and Z, or try out X, Y, and Z because you've got this extra added time. Really encourage you to lean into that. I also think staying really diligent with your PT exercises is one of the biggest things you can do, because not only will it lead to the eventual recovery, but it also makes you feel like you are actually taking steps to heal the injury. And I think it's really important just to take that action, and it's like you can be proud of yourself for staying diligent and taking the steps towards healing. So I hope that's helpful. If you're dealing with an injury, I am so sorry. Trust me, I get it. Like it really is so frustrating and so hard mentally, but I promise you can do it and you will come out stronger, and running will always be there for you. Let's chat a little about fuel. I feel like I talked about this a lot on Instagram, but I got a couple questions. I got a lot of questions actually. I feel like because I had so many stomach issues during training. All of y'all were so sweet to care and were like, how is your stomach? My stomach was actually great. I did have the issues of there not being enough porta potties out there, which I know everyone's like, the woods is where you go. Yes, I know. And like, trust me, I utilize them for sure. But for like the first 30 miles, I was always by people. And it's a race with 400 men and like 80 women. So anytime I looked around, it was men. So I couldn't just go like pop a squat behind a tree because there were all these men coming. And I don't know, maybe people do that, but I personally did not feel comfortable with that. That's where I was like, this is like a little unfair to be a woman out here because these guys don't care that there aren't porta potties, but it's actually really hard and frustrating for all of the women out there. But yeah, there were porta potties at mile 3, at 10, and 20, and it just like was not enough. But that is a different tangent. My fueling worked well. I did not have any stomach issues. I did have to go to the bathroom a lot. I always have to go to the bathroom a lot, whether it's just number 1 or sometimes number 2 as well. I just like go very frequently, and so yeah, it was all good. I just had to go to the bathroom a lot, but I didn't have any stomach pain. My strategy was 60 to 90 grams of carbs every hour, and so I basically just packed 5 of everything because I estimated it would take me 5 hours, which was not correct. Each loop, so I had 5 of my gels, I had 5 bars, and then 5 like electrolyte carb packets in my water. And yeah, it worked really well. I definitely ran out of water out there, which I was taking so much longer than I expected, and it was really hot. So I might need to tweak like the water situation for next time, but overall it worked well, and I'm really happy. I also made like a last minute change to my fuel to switch out of the Cliff bars because I didn't realize that they had like the amount of fiber that they did. And so my coach was like, that could be causing like your stomach issues. So then I ended up switching to using all scratch bars out there, and it worked perfectly. Like I said, I was bored of it, but I would much rather be bored of my fuel than have stomach issues out there. So really grateful there was no stomach pain. Like actually such an answered prayer to not have that issue out there. And then another question, which I thought was a really good question, was what fuel did I choose to carry versus use at aid stations? I wanted to have everything on me that I knew I needed. And then I really just utilized the aid stations for like the salt pills, the pickle juice, very unexpected since I hate pickles. Didn't really love the pickle juice either, but it did really help. And just like if I was craving something else other than what I had, it would just go and be a supplement to what I was using. I'm sure some people factor in like the aid station fuel into their strategy, but I just wanted to have everything with me, and that worked well. And then it was like exciting to get to the aid stations to be like, ooh, what do I want? Does any of this sound good? So yeah, I think like everyone needs to kind of figure out their fuel strategy for themselves, but for me personally, I just wanted to make sure I had everything that I had trained with out there. Okay, we're getting to the end of the questions. So last few questions are kind of about training and my routine. I know I touched a little on things I would do differently, so I don't want to get too like into that again or too chatty about all of that. But I did get some questions about how I fit training into my routine, which I think is a very valid question. And if you've followed me for a while, then you probably know that, especially after that injury a couple years ago that I talked about, I'm just very passionate about not letting running rule my life or be my life. Like I do these races because it's fun. Content creation is also not my job, so it's not like there's anything relying on me doing these races. I do it solely because I'm so passionate about it and it is so fun for me to be out there. And so if training is a really big stress for me, then maybe it's not something that I have the capacity for. And I just encourage you to also ask yourself, I think training definitely takes sacrifice. You definitely have to be okay with saying no to things, but ultimately, like, I'm not trying to train for it to stress me out. I'm training because it adds to my life. And so I just think it's always important to remember that, like, I don't want to sacrifice my other hobbies. I don't want to sacrifice my relationship with my husband, my family, or my friends because I have such a huge training. And that was something I really talked to my coach about as well. Like, I have a really busy full-time job. I also freelance. I also have content. And so there's just like a lot going on in my life that I was like, I feel like I know people who have run 100-mile races who trained 100-mile weeks, and I just like don't think that's something I have capacity for. And so I think that's definitely an advantage also of having a coach, is you can talk to them about your lifestyle and what makes sense. Obviously, again, you know, I've mentioned how I wonder if maybe I should have run more mileage during it, but I also feel like my coach and I came up with this plan specifically for the season of life that I am in. That was a lot of extra like chattiness. I feel like really didn't have to do with anything. But my daily routine to fit it in, the only way for me to fit the runs in is to wake up early. So I wake up around 5 a.m. Now that I don't have the runs, I wake up closer to 6 a.m. But yeah, I would wake up around 5 a.m. to get my strength training in, get my runs done. A lot of them would be on the treadmill because if I'm waking up at 5 a.m., it's obviously not light enough outside for me to go out there alone. So yeah, I kind of just make it a priority to wake up, get it done. I'm not much of a snoozer. If my alarm goes off and I'm tired, I still know that like I will feel better after I get the run or the training in. So would prioritize doing all that in the morning, starting my work day and spending my evenings doing the other things that I love and doing all the other hobbies. So I know some people are evening runners, but like honestly for me, I just think I would come up with so many excuses if I left my runs or workouts until later in the day. And so waking up early and getting them done is the best thing that I can do for my schedule and for everything else that I have in life. And I think this time around, I don't know, I really want to try and rope Dom into training like for all of it with me, because it would just be so much easier if he would wake up early and like run with me, so I wouldn't have to do the treadmill. But I feel like that's also really not fair to him. But yeah, waking up early is really kind of my only other thing, and then just like being very like diligent. I don't know what word I'm trying to think of, but just like not caring if you have to say no to certain things, and just being honest with yourself and honest with people too. If you are the kind of person who says yes to things that you don't like 100% want to go to or like want to have on your plate, I think I've gotten really good about saying no and like not feeling bad about not going to certain things. And then my last do's and don'ts when it comes to training for your 100 miler. This is a great question. I feel like I've talked about this a lot already, but do train your stomach. Literally so many people out there, and I'd heard this before too, like I would tell them it was my first 100 miler and they were like, oh, welcome to the eating contest, like make sure you're staying on top of your fuel, like, oh, it's a food eating contest, it's not like a running race, like it's all about the food. And so fuel is just so important out there. Like obviously you have to eat so much out there in order to run that race. So I would just say really make sure you are training with a lot of different types of fuel and training your stomach to make sure you can handle all of that. Obviously, I've already talked about all of my takeaways and just the things I would do. I would make sure you are also really focusing on your sleep, on your nutrition, and these are all things that I can improve on. Like I am not perfect. My nutrition is a huge area that I really want to work on and grow in. I would also say still incorporate speed into your training. You still really want runs where like your heart rate is getting elevated. I would say practice with the gear that you plan on using. You don't want to use anything new out there, and don't let yourself be held back by fear. I think that is my most important thing, and I think it's really easy to write something off because you think you can't do it, because you think you're not capable, because you think you're not worthy of like spending that time like dedicated to achieving that goal. There's so many excuses that we could tell yourself, and I just mentioned like I'm not embarrassed or don't feel bad at all about dropping. Like I have felt confident in that decision since I made it, and 2 weeks later I still feel very confident in that. But I think it would be really easy to be scared of like, oh, well, what if I drop? Or let guilt eat me alive for dropping and not finish it, or be embarrassed for putting this goal out there and not accomplishing it. So I would just encourage you not to let any of those fears like keep you away from it, because it is specifically 100 milers. Like it is such a big goal. Like that is insane to run 100 miles. When you stop and actually think about it, like that is actually insane. And there's nothing like, yes, it's a big distance. So it is a very scary distance, but the fear of like, oh, well, what happens if I don't finish? Like you should just be proud of yourself for even trying. So don't write yourself out of it before you even start. Like that, I think is one of my biggest pieces of advice. And that's not the right way to phrase it, but like, yeah, just don't, you're selling yourself short if you think you are not capable of training, because I promise if you feel like you have the capacity and the time and the energy to train, you 100% can do it. And that is my mentality that I am taking into the next like training block that I'll have starting in the summer as we go into 2026. I know that I can do it, and I know that it was the Achilles that got me down this time around, but I'm just gonna be so careful about staying healthy, and I know I can cross that finish line. So yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap this Q&A up here. Like I said, I have stuff over on Instagram in my highlights saved where I answered more questions, but hopefully this just gave you some encouragement, a closer look into Rocky Raccoon, a closer look into ultras, training, all of that fun stuff. But yeah, I hope this was really helpful for you. And if you have any questions specifically about the race or training or running 100 milers, obviously I haven't completed one, so I might not have the best advice, but I can just share my experience and the things that I've learned. But yeah, feel free to ask me any questions below, and I'm always happy to help the best that I can. And I just so appreciate you for being here. I so appreciate you for watching. I cannot, like I said, I'm not burned out from running at all. I am excited for a break, but I truly cannot wait for the next training vlog for Rocky Raccoon 2026 to start. I just think it's gonna be so fun. I definitely have like a fire under my booty to make sure I cross that finish line next year, and it's gonna be so fun to train together again. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. Give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time.